in terms of the Bantustan experience, is the past system. Can you please tell us about the past system?
So I'll give you a very personal example. I was born in Jerusalem. I'm sure people know Jerusalem because of the Bible, but I was born in Jerusalem and I went to school to Jerusalem. But when you become 16, you essentially become an adult under the Israeli system. So you get an ID. Israelis have blue IDs, Palestinians have green IDs. In the ID, there's everything, all your information. Your name, your father's name, your mother's name, what religion you're from, what city you're from. And based on that is what allows you to move. You never leave the house with that. Otherwise, you're in big trouble. And so people from the West Bank and Gaza, to be able to travel into Jerusalem or any Palestinian city inside Israel, they need a permit that is given by the Israeli military, and they do a security check. And that permit is very much regulated to specific times, to specific places. And so when I was 16, I needed a permit to go to the school I always went to, in the city I was born in. And there are some cities in 48 Palestine that I never visited until I was an adult. So in a way, they took away my experience of my own land, and I felt like a foreigner in it. And if you are caught without a permit, you get beaten, you get thrown into jail, and then kicked out, you're sent back to the West Bank. But also it's a system to regulate very cheap labor, which I think is something that also resonates within this context. Israelis use Palestinians in the West Bank, Gaza as cheap labor. They've suffocated our economy because they control all the entry and exit points. So we cannot import or export anything. And if we do, we have to pay double the tax. We don't have access to 60% of the West Bank, which is our agricultural areas, potential industrial areas. We don't have access to our water. So in terms of building a real robust economy, it's being suffocated by this colonial structure. And so that causes a lot of unemployment. And so that develops a labor base for the Israelis. And so through that permit regime, they bring in cheap labor into Israel to work as their construction, build their roads, to work in their restaurants, etc. And people go in every day and back to their villages, to their towns, to their cities, through this pass system.
You know, that is exactly how apartheid works. So it sounds like apartheid. So if people find it difficult to name it, I will name it.
Yeah.
I will say it's apartheid. If people call it anything else, is there another version that they're calling it in Israel to describe what is happening in Palestine?
Well, Israel describes itself as a democracy. They don't even recognize that there's so the lowest base of recognition of this oppression is occupation, right? And I think there's a consensus around the world that some of Palestine is occupied. But the understanding in the West is that Israel is a democracy at home, but it has an occupation across the Green Line, which is West Bank, etc. And they don't understand that the regime actually is the same from the river to the sea in the entire land. So now there's been a debate in Palestinian society about what do we call it. And I think there's a firm understanding amongst the majority that it's a settler colonial regime manifesting as apartheid. And that's now where the conversation is. And I think many human rights organizations are catching up to calling it apartheid. So apartheid is actually becoming the dominant term in public discourse, not just in Palestine, but all over the world.
But I think we need to name it apartheid because apartheid is a crime against humanity.
Yeah.
Which is already recognized by the UN. But if the UN recognizes that, which is dominated by the US, then it becomes different to have an ally in the Middle East.
Yeah, and that's the trajectory we're going on now. So just before I came to South Africa a few weeks ago, Amnesty International was the latest international human rights organization to release a report. It was like over 200 pages of very critical analysis that comes to the conclusion that it's an apartheid regime. Israeli human rights organizations have come out and said it's apartheid. Palestinians have been, and human rights organizations and activists have been saying this for a very long time. So the world is starting to catch up and the narrative is heading that way.